Good evening, everyone. I'm Debbie Katz, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's Kristallnacht program. This is the 85th anniversary of the first Kristallnacht. First, I want to introduce Miriam Kramer, who is our sign language interpreter, and I want to welcome all of the deaf and hard of hearing audience. On Kristallnacht, November 9th and 10th, 1938, Nazis in Germany, in Austria, and in the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia torched synagogues, vandalized businesses and private homes, and killed 91 Jews. On that day, many men were rounded up and taken to a concentration camp. Many people believe, it's widely seen, that Kristallnacht was actually seen as the beginning of the Holocaust, in which 6 million European Jews lost their lives. For 5 weeks, all of us know that the state of Israel has been fighting an intense war with Hamas, with inspiring unity, moral clarity, and courage. In addition, Jews in America and around the world are experiencing a large increase in anti-Semitic rhetoric and acts of violence. We must learn from our history. We have to be very clear-headed and proactive. Never, never again. Tonight's program will begin with a short documentary called The Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht 1938. It's a very short video, only about 4 minutes long. We had considered a number of different videos, and we landed on this one primarily because our audience, and myself included, are quite raw from all the images that we've been seeing over the last 5 weeks. We want you to know what happened that led up to Kristallnacht, the rise of Nazism starting in 1933, and this video does a very good job of explaining that. The video is captioned, so there will not be a sign language interpreter for this portion. After the film is over, we're going to have our speaker for the evening, Mrs. Sonja Simon, and after that, there'll be some question and answer. Following that, Rabbi David Rosenbaum will give us a Dvar Torah. And now, The Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht, 1938.
In late 1933, Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Nazi Germany. In the next few years, his Nazi party implemented many nationalistic and anti-Semitic policies. Policies that kicked Jews out of civil services and made German businesses stop servicing Jews. Policies that made sure Jews and Aryans couldn't marry or have any extramarital relationship. Policies that harassed Jewish people. Fast forward to October 1938, direct orders were given to arrest Polish Jews living in Nazi Germany and to send them back to Poland. And so around 17,000 Polish Jews were sent to the Polish border, where they were stuck. The Polish border guards wouldn't let them in and they couldn't go back to Germany. So now you have 17,000 people stuck without food or water or shelter at the Polish border. In the crowd of 17,000 were the parents of Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew living in Paris after escaping Germany the years prior. Upon hearing the news, Herschel became angry, so angry that he would go out and buy a revolver. On the morning of November 7, 1938, Herschel would enter the German embassy in Paris, posing as a spy. He would claim to have important documents that he could only hand to a high-ranking official. He was then immediately directed to the office of Ernst von Raff. Once in the office, Herschel pulled out his revolver and fired 5 shots straight into the abdomen of Ernst von Raff. Herschel was then reportedly heard shouting insults to the bleeding official while claiming he acted in the name of persecuted Jews. Ernst von Raff would pass away on the evening of November 9th. His passing greatly angered Hitler, the Nazi Party, and many Germans. That anger quickly translated into action that very night. Nazi SS, Nazi SA, Hitler Youth, and German citizens took to the streets all over Germany. They would set fire to synagogues all over the country and vandalize Jewish homes, schools, hospitals, businesses, and cemeteries. They would also attack and murder many Jews as well. German police officers and German firefighters were ordered to do nothing as the situation spiraled out of control. Firefighters would only extinguish fires that threatened Aryan-owned property. By the morning of November 10th, 1938, everything had died down. The aftermath of the previous night was clear for everyone to see. More than 250 synagogues were burned down, but over 7,000 Jewish businesses were trashed and looted, and even more homes were vandalized. Nearly 100 Jews were murdered as well. The streets were littered with broken glasses, giving rise to the name the Night of Broken Glass or Kristallnacht. The Nazi Party placed heavy blame on the Jewish community for quote-unquote causing Kristallnacht. They would go on to arrest more than 30,000 Jewish men and send them to various Nazi concentration camps. They would also place a fine on the German Jewish community, reportedly worth 1 billion mark, or roughly 500 million USD. Kristallnacht was reported all over the world, with various reactions ranging from shock to condemnation to criticism and to rage. However, a few countries would actually take any meaningful action to help the German Jews. By the start of World War II, there was still more than 200,000 German Jews stuck in Germany, awaiting an uncertain future. Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, was a turning point in the harassment of Jews in Nazi Germany. Before Kristallnacht, the harassment was mainly non-violent, but now going forward, it seems like the mistreatment and the harassment of German Jews and other Jewish people would only intensify. It would seem that things will only get worse as the Nazi Party aimed to solve the quote-unquote Jewish question. However, a few countries
Thank you. It kind of tells the story in a nutshell. Many people don't actually know the specific details that led up to Kristallnacht, and we thought it was important to give that background. Okay, and now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Sonja Simon. She began her life in rural Germany just as Hitler was rising to power. Sonja's mother and my grandmother were sisters. Thank God, Sonja's family was able to escape. Unfortunately, that was not true for my grandparents and great-grandparents. If you have a question as Sonja speaks, please type that into the chat. Your message will come straight to me, and as time allows, we'll have a question and answer session after Sonja's talk. And now, Mrs. Sonja Simon.
Good evening to everyone here. My talk will give you a slightly different perspective from the others you may have heard in previous years. In fact, I originally hesitated to speak at all because, thank God, I do not have any of the truly horrendous memories of those who were themselves interned in the camps. On the other hand, there seems to be a tendency to forget the suffering of the German Jews. This is true even in the World Holocaust conferences, where dozens of suffering countries are enumerated. Poland, but Germany is never included. And this is in spite of the fact that harassment and discrimination against Jews, indeed the vilest anti-Semitism, started much earlier in Germany than anywhere else. So I would like to give you some insights into the early years from a child's point of view of someone growing up in the 30s in Germany, and share some of the vivid, terrifying memories that have remained with me for all these years. Where possible, I will fill in the gaps with things I have been told by my parents and relatives about those awful years. I was born in 1933, the same year that Hitler was, quote, voted in as chancellor, in a small town with only 2 Jewish families. My father had lived there with his parents and siblings for many years. Immediately, the anti-Semitism escalated to amazing heights in this little farm community. My father's good friends in his soccer club no longer wanted him as a member. Soon, Germans were urged not to patronize Jewish stores, so my father's clothing and dry goods stores suffered. After the Nuremberg laws were passed in 1936, it was illegal for Jews to have Gentile servants, and my father and grandfather were briefly imprisoned for failing to let their housekeeper go. One of their neighbors had reported them. By then, in 36, my father's parents made plans to leave because they already had a son, my uncle, in America, and their daughters soon followed. But my father, who continued to have faith in the future of Germany, believed that these conditions could not last. He either was too blind or too frightened to tear up roots and give up everything and leave. In fact, my mother's parents, who ultimately perished, along with their other daughter and son-in-law, wanted to take both daughters and families to Israel. But both sons-in-law thought that the idea was crazy and that Hitler could not possibly stay in power. However, fortunately, my father did let his parents convince him to apply for a visa to America under the immigration quota. In any case, a little girl in this environment did not have any childhood friends. I had to be kept out of danger in our own backyard. Once, a little neighborhood boy saw me, spit at me, and called me a dirty Jew. When my father took me to the boy's father to complain, the father was obviously very pleased at his son's act. So it went until the infamous Kristallnacht, November 9th to 10th, 38. In fact, whereas we commemorate Yom HaShoah now on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, for German Jews, the real anniversary is November 10th. This was the night that, as you just saw in the video, in the bigger cities, all the Jewish businesses, synagogues, and schools were smashed, books and Torahs burned, and arrests begun. And it is a day that I will never forget. My father was in town that day, but not at home. Keep in mind that the town was so small, you literally could see from one end of the main road to the other. My mother was busy in the basement, and someone knocked very loudly at the door. I, a small 5-year-old, opened the door, and in front of me were the tallest, most threatening men I had ever seen, both in uniform. One was the town constable, whom I had seen once or twice, and the other was a Nazi official. The Nazi barked at me, "Where is your mother?" I was terrified, and then the constable asked the question in slightly kinder tones. I called my mother, who at first would not come up because she thought I just wanted company or attention. When I told her about the men, she came running up, also terrified. In vicious tones, they demanded my father, and my mother told them he was out. But my father had seen the official car in front of his home, and as the good businessman he was, he came rushing home to see who or what was happening. Maybe if he had not, this whole story might have changed. Who knows? Anyway, he came right into the hands of the arresting officials. They grabbed him immediately. Thanks to the constable, he was able to take his winter coat, and my mother was able to slip him 1 vial of insulin because he was a diabetic needing daily injections. He was taken to Buchenwald, where he spent a horrible 4 weeks, along with the other Jewish man in town. Our families were and still are good friends. My father survived, thank God. Some Jewish doctor was able to provide him with additional insulin, and by some miracle, both he and the neighbor were released, both looking like half-dead skeletons. We have always attributed his release to Hashem's mercy and to 3 other factors, which in those early years of Nazism might still have had some effect. The Nazis were, at that time, still willing to get rid of Jews, not necessarily to exterminate them all. First, my father had an Iron Cross, a decoration he earned in World War I as an 18-year-old soldier just before armistice. Furthermore, my mother went around bribing anyone she could to get him out, and that may have helped. But most important, we did have that precious visa. As soon as he was released, we immediately got ready to leave. In fact, my parents packed up all their belongings. The store, of course, had been closed, and the house was going to be confiscated, and prepaid the entire lift to America. They probably suspected that the lift would never arrive, but they could not delay the departure for material goods. It was suggested, in fact, that my father send us ahead and that he wait for the lift to go with him, but thank God he refused. So on February 9th, 1939, we left on a German ship from the harbor at Hamburg. This also must have been terrible for my parents. Keep in mind that although my father's family had left earlier, my mother was leaving her parents, sister, brother-in-law, and 2 nieces, who, as everyone knew, were also in grave danger, and she would never see her parents or sister again. Anyway, we were allowed to go with 1 suitcase each of clothes, a total of 40 marks in cash, wristwatches, And I was able to carry my large Bavarian costume doll, which was then taller than I was. I remember being stripped naked along with my mother while they searched us to see if we had hidden any valuables in our bodies. Ironically, the doll was not searched, although I suppose if we had attempted to hide jewels or cash in there, our faces would have given us away. In any case, my parents were too afraid to be caught and kept in Germany to take any risks like that. So after a long 10-day journey, which was, I remember, great fun for me, I had the run of the ship, but agonizing for my parents, between unbearable seasickness and probably heart-rending grief and fear. We arrived on February 19th to the coldest, most miserably stormy weather my parents had ever experienced. But we were safe, and my father's family had come to meet us. So at least that part of the nightmare was over, and we were free together, and we could try to rebuild our shattered lives. That is, until we learned about the post-Depression economy here and the fact that no jobs were available for immigrants at that time. Life for us was very difficult until the war broke out in 1941 and factory jobs were more available. After that, things got better, but the silence from Germany about my mother's family was deafening. In an ironic twist, precisely on VJ Day in 1945, an important letter came from my two cousins telling of their survival and the unspeakably horrible deaths of my mother's family. So while the rest of the world was going crazy with joy and jubilation, dancing, kissing, crying on the streets, the long war had ended. On that very day, I was expected to stay indoors and mourn with my mother as she sat down for the 1-hour shiva. For us, the final realization and aftermath, the final solution, had ultimately come on the happiest day that America had experienced in many years. And incidentally, I will add that Debbie Katz is the daughter of one of those cousins that survived. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sonja. That was very well done. My mother was the one who wrote that letter to Sonja's mother, telling her that she and her sister had survived, but that the parents and that my mother's mother had died and her parents. So, in other words, Sonja's sister and parents had died. Okay. Subsequently, by the way, my mother and her sister did come to America, and that's why I'm here. Actually, they married, both of them that got married in America to German Jews and raised families in this country. So I have a couple of questions, not a lot, but just a couple of good questions here. One is that you were quite isolated, as you say, when you were in your early years as the only Jewish families living in your town, which I think is called Breidenbach.
Right.
Once you got to America, where did you live? And did you have access to other German Jews? What was your life like when you came?
My parents and I lived in a crowded Washington Heights apartment, along with my grandparents and their son and daughter, my aunt and uncle. As I said, the economy was very depressed and jobs were hard to find. My mother worked as a domestic and my father did odd jobs until the war effort provided more permanent factory jobs. Actually, he commuted from Washington Heights to Weehawken, which is across the river, every day for all those years. I was fine. My mother was a domestic, so she was home part of the day. I went to public school and I did well. I wasn't happy with my Hebrew school, which was an after-school class 3 times a week. It was low cost, first of all, because my parents couldn't afford more, but it was run by very poor teachers. And I learned very little and left as soon as I could, which was after 8th grade. A few years later, things got better. We got our own apartment. I went to school, I went to college. Everything was okay. Those were relatively happy years, although money was always tight.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. Did you go back at all to Germany? And if so, what did you find?
I did once. I went with my husband. He went back regularly. He was a Holocaust survivor who survived in England. And he was proud enough to show his face in Hamburg, where he had been deported every year. I went with him once and we went to the small town. As I approached, I had made an appointment with one of the residents, and as we got to his house, I heard him say on the phone, in German, of course, the Jewish woman is here. The house I was born in was a wreck. I couldn't bear to go in. I just felt it was an awful trip, and we got out of there as quickly as possible. We spent a night in Frankfurt, and then we went to the town where your mother was born, Debbie, where my mother was born as well.
Right.
That was not very pleasant either. We were driven around by someone who called himself a historian, and he made some anti-Semitic remarks about the older generations that he knew while they lived there. All in all, I was not about to go back.
The people in the villages knew each other for generations, and so for when I also went to Niederomen, which is the name of that other village, and they all knew everything that had happened to every one of the Jews in their communities, and for that matter, everything that had happened to each other. This is what happens when you live in a town with 300 families or something. There are a number of other questions here. We'll take one more question. Simcha, who is a young boy, I guess less than bar mitzvah age, is asking if Sonja has memories of any neighbors in Germany that were nice or supportive of the Jews.
I do not, but then I was too young to understand that whole idea. I do not remember anyone helping us, but my parents might have remembered some. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sonja. We really appreciate you sharing your story, and we wish you, may Hashem bless you with many, many healthy years. And we want to give a virtual appreciation over here for Sonja. Thank you very much for your speech.
Very, very welcome. I'm glad I could do this.
And now I'd like to introduce Rabbi David Rosenbaum, Mora de Asra of Young Israel Shomrai Emunah, who will share Dvar Torah with us.
Thank you very much, Debbie and Natanya, and all the members of the committee who put together this opportunity for us. I think it's always a challenge to create the Kristallnacht program. It must have been a unique challenge this year. As Debbie, you said at the beginning, all of our emotions have been raw, and as a committee to try to figure out the most appropriate way to conduct the program and to expose these pained emotions in yet another aspect of the Jewish experience must have been a great challenge, but I think it's to the benefit of so many of us. And you see over 200 boxes logged in tonight. So thank you very much. I also want to welcome Rabbi Weinberg and thank him and KMS for their partnership in this very vital program. And of course, thank Mrs. Simon for the wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. In this week's Torah portion, we see the beginning of the relationship between Yaakov, Jacob, and his twin brother Esav. And we see that, unfortunately, the relationship devolved into one that Esav had hatred for Yaakov, for Jacob. And a couple of weeks from now, in the Torah portion, the Torah talks about a reunion between Esav and Jacob. And it talks about Esav kissing Jacob. And it's very interesting. The rabbis of the Medrash discuss, was this kiss a sincere kiss or maybe not so authentic? And within the discussion is a fascinating quote. And the quote is, Halacha hi biyadua, it's known, she'esav sone liYaakov, that Esav and presumably his descendants bear enmity towards Yaakov, Jacob, and his descendants. There are people that hate us. Thank God, there are wonderful people of this world who see our goodness, who appreciate us, but there are people that hate us. And I don't know about any of you, but year after year, when we have this very special program, I say to myself, I guess this is a reminder that terrible things have happened in Jewish past, and there are lessons to learn. And I guess there's anti-Semitism in the world. My friends, we don't have to guess. And we've seen and heard, and some of us have experienced terrible things over these past weeks. And I think particularly in the current context, Kristallnacht commemoration is so vital. And I just want to share with you a couple of thoughts as to why I think it is. It's easy to see these experiences of the past weeks and to try to convince ourselves that this is a one-off. Difficult circumstances, challenging events. This is not the way the world really is. But the truth is, it's only decades ago that there was such strong anti-Semitism, so apparent and so clear. So it seems like there really is anti-Semitism out there. By some, who knows how many, and it just is sort of buried under the surface. What's the value of recognizing that? I would like to make 2 points. One is, there are people who hate me and hate you and hate anyone who's a Jew just because we're Jews. And they have no interest in our political views. They have no interest in our religious outlook. A Jew is a Jew. If there are people out there like that, it really compels us to connect in an all more meaningful way with each and every fellow Jew. Of course, the march on Tuesday, God willing, many of us will have the opportunity to attend, is a wonderful opportunity to strengthen those bonds with so many Jews and so many others who aren't Jewish, but demonstrate their love of Israel. But there's another point. If all those years ago, if there was such terrible anti-Semitism, and there was such a wicked man, followed by so many willing assistants, whose goal was to eliminate us from this world, what a remarkable thing it is that we're still here. And for us to reflect on, through the difficulty and through the challenge and through the fears, to reflect on the fact that for all the hatred and for all the evil, we're still around. It acts as a tremendous reminder that God is there for us. As Mrs. Simon mentioned during her presentation, there's a verse in Tehillim in Psalms chapter 20 that so many of us have been saying in different forms over these past weeks. Hema karu v'nafalu. Other nations of the world bow and fall. V'anachnu kamnu v'nisodad. And we rise up and still exist. How many anti-Semites have risen against us over the generations? How many powerful nations are gone? We're still here. And we believe that the reason for that is the next verse. Hashem Hoshia, God is the source of our salvation. Hamelech Yaneinu v'yom korenu, the King who will answer us on the day that we call. It's very difficult to come together to remember such terrible events, but we gain great strength and comfort by coming together. And may we always give each other that comfort, and may we always connect to God and enjoy his special protection and affection for the Jewish people. Just gonna say a chapter of Psalms now. Actually, we're gonna say that chapter that I read from before, Perek Chaf, chapter 20. Lamnatseach mizmor l'David. Yancho Adonai biyom tzara. Yisagev Hashem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezracha mikodesh. Umitzion yisadeka. Yizkor kol minchosecha. V'yolascha yidash nesela. Yiten l'chachil vavecha. V'chol atzascha yimalei. Niranana b'shuasecha. Uv'shem Eloheinu nidgol. Yimalei Adonai kol mishalosecha. Ato yodati ki Oshi Adonai mishicho. Yanehu mishmei kadsho. B'kvuros yeshag yimino. Ele v'orechev yele v'asusim. V'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir. Hema karu v'nafalu. V'anachnu kamnu v'nisodad. Adonai Hoshia. Hamelech Yaneinu v'yom karenu. Achenu kobesi soel hanasunim batzar v'shivya. Hom dim bein bayam uvein bayabasha. Hamakom yirachem aleihem. V'yotziem mitzara l'rvacha me'afela liora. M'shibu l'giyula. Hashta bagalav isman kariv. V'nomar amen. Our brothers, the entire family of Israel, who are delivered into distress and captivity, whether they are on sea or dry land. May the Omnipresent One have mercy on them and remove them from distress to relief, from darkness to light, from subjugation to redemption, now, speedily, and soon.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's very extremely meaningful. As we close our program this evening, I would especially like to thank Rabbi Rosenbaum and Rabbi Weinberg, for both of their continued support for our community Holocaust programs. Without that, we wouldn't be where we are today, and we wouldn't have such large community involvement. As there are some thank yous that I want to make. First of all, Natanya Noble chaired this program, and she spent tireless hours of planning. Natanya, you made the program happen in a very difficult year, and thank you. Thank you also to other members of the Holocaust Committee, specifically Lisa Melman, Ken Jacobson, and Joyce Dworsky-Stror. I want to thank Melissa Miller for helping us with the flyer, Menashe Katz for his outstanding technological support. Thank you also to the office teams at Kemp Synagogue and Young Israel Shomrai who are always there for us and without whom we would not be able to have these programs. We want to thank Vital Signs, LLC, for once again sponsoring our sign language interpreter, which enables our deaf and hard of hearing communities to participate in this program. Thank you, Miriam, for being our sign language interpreter. Most of all, we want to thank all of you for tuning into our community's Holocaust commemorations every year in large numbers. By participating, you are actively keeping alive the memory of the 6 million Jews perished al Kiddush Hashem. We're going to end by singing Hatikva. Rabbi, would you be willing to lead it, just to start it? And then all of us will kind of sing it together. Okay.
Oh, okay.
But
But
I
other
know
people
that
have to unmute.
you can unmute, but you can also not, whatever. We're going to try to do this, okay, everybody? And after this, we want to wish you a good evening.
Somebody should have
Thank you all very much for coming. We wish you a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. To everyone. Thank you.
Beautiful.